So, friends, I've got to be honest with you. There's a couple of teams that, as we navigate our way through the AFL preseason, they feel really exciting to talk about. And exciting in the sense of so many variables, so many possibilities could come, not just in terms of ladder positioning, but in the Supercoach and AFL fantasy landscape that the coaches panel talks about. We could either get some absolute fool's gold or some absolute nuggets of goodness. And so now, as we get real close to the Amy Community Series and ultimately through actual games of football to dissect, I thought it'd be an interesting conversation to bring some of my favorite content creators in the football space to get their hands on the ground, eyes on the ground view of players and clubs that they support to be able to help you with your AFL fantasy and Supercoach side. On today's episode, we got to talk about Essendon. So much potential. And joining me today from the Bomber Banter YouTube channel, it's Fiona. So good to have you jump on the channel with us, Fiona. I don't know how Bombers fans are feeling at the moment, but there does feel like there's a little bit of a flicker of hope that maybe now we're starting to turn the corner to be that side we want to be.
Well, firstly, hi, MJ. Thank you for having me. Very excited to have a little chat with you today. I think as confused as the entire AFL fraternity and supporters are, we are just as confused about and in the unknown about what our kind of 2026 season holds. And it's this, as you mentioned, there are so many facets to it, so many layers to it. Last year, it was hard to take absolutely anything from anything. Player development individually, game plan. We really didn't get a good grasp of where we sit in terms of both those metrics. So honestly, anything could happen.
Look, there's a world where Essendon, rival West Coast Eagles for the wooden spoon. And while it would be disappointing, it's in the realms of probability. While getting inside that play-in tournament, to borrow an NBA, kind of phraseology, that's right in the mix as well for Essendon. I've got so many questions for you. The reason we've got you on this podcast is I know you are like a hawk when it comes to Essendon in terms of information, spending time around the club, watching not just what players are doing, but the evolution of how the coaching is directing and training and what's going on. So for people that aren't in the position to be able to get that level of information and visibility that you do, I thought it'd be helpful for the followers of the coaches panel to have a chat with you, because there could be some fantasy and Supercoach gold for us. Last year, you kind of alluded to it for us right at the top of the episode that there were just a few things that didn't quite work for Essendon. And I think one of those things was the midfield was a little dysfunctional at times. Now, availability and health was a pretty contributing factor to that. Like, there wasn't too many teams that had just the injury curse that happened to hit your club. But statistically, they were like top 15 for winning the ball in the league for centre clearances, 17th for getting their hands on it at stoppage, and the second worst team in the league for being that first possession at stoppage. What is it that you've been seeing and hearing and watching from the club through these preseason moments that gives A, Essendon fans, and also B, the fantasy community, some hope that maybe this narrative might turn in terms of how they're going to get their hands on the ball and ultimately convert it into scoreboard impact opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's kind of at the source of where you win the football, isn't it? And I personally, my gut feel says that it was completely personnel based, not just who was missing, but also the combination. Whenever we had players available, we had their like for like available and not someone who was going to complement their style. So it just never eventuated that we had our full, our A team basically who we wanted out there. So you either had too many midfielders who were flat-footed or not enough outside spread. So I personally think it was a lot to do with personnel. But of course we were shocking in terms of pressure around the ball as well. And I also think on the outside we weren't there were often we would get caught out in terms of positioning. So our midfielders either not knowing where to position or the diligence and the discipline to actually look where their opponents are, getting sucked into the ball. So I think it had a lot to do with that in terms of the midfield in particular. But just from a holistic point of view, from what I've seen at training and what they've been training quite diligently is, I mean, fast, frenetic ball movement. And I know that would be like an 18 club, all other 17 clubs are training that. That's modern football. But for Essendon, who played such an uncontested, stagnant, safe brand of football in 2025, that has been something that I reckon it's on the whiteboard and crossed out in big, like, red letters. I'll often be hearing coaches yelling in match sim, up with the uncontested. They just want the ball moving in fluid motion, handball chains. There's a coach who keeps yelling out to a couple of players, I won't name names, but he keeps saying, stop being a boundary umpire, meaning that they're flat-footed. Where are you going to next? Just trying to trigger their brains into getting into, like, after you've disposed of the football, what is your next move? You know, the best teams play that expansive football. They've got the diligence to get to the next contest, where to go, where their opponent is. And we just don't have that, whether that's just personnel or they just don't have that education. So, yeah, it's been, I mean, obviously we want that cleaner first possession at stoppage and in the centre bounce. But I think if we had our first choice midfield combination available, I think we'd see a much more improved midfield mix.
Certainly. And what do you think that kind of midfield mix is going to look like in 2026? So many people are, again, some availability of troops is going to be a huge piece of the pie. Darcy Parish is just one of those that was rarely seen in 2025. A lot of people are speculative around the former captain in Zach Merida. Is he on the ISO and they're just preparing to not have him in 12 months' time and forcing him out of that mix, and whether or not is it a Caldwell and Durham-led midfielder who again, are different types of midfielders to what you've been able to have through there. What do you kind of, again, training is always hard and match sim, like you need double of everything to be able to do it. So it's a little misleading sometimes in the fantasy spaces. People are like, this guy's playing through the midfield. I'm like, yeah, but you need 8 of them. You don't just need first choice. But from your visibility and from watching the club, and also a bit of projection and opinion, what do you think this midfield mix is going to look like? And who do you think are going to be the main weapons through there?
Well, the positive, wonderful news for Essendon fans and fantasy players is that we have had our full array of midfielders available to us for the entire preseason. Hallelujah, Lord, praise be, may it stay that way, because it's just preseason. But it's notable that the likes of Jai Caldwell had interrupted preseasons last year. So this is important time for not only themselves individually, but as a cohesive group and a cohesive unit to start to build some of that cohesion. I mean, Durham hasn't played a lot of football with Caldwell and Parish played 3 games last year. So he hasn't played much football with Caldwell and Zach Merritt and Nick Martin and Roberts and all these guys who might float through there. But I mean, in terms of Darcy Parish, I know we hate to say it, but he has had a flawless preseason and he's flying in there. He really is. I mean, he's just that high-end clearance and stoppage influence, and he's standing out in terms of the mix. But I also think Jai Caldwell being in that group makes him play his best football as well. And it was interesting because last week, Calders didn't play in the intra-club because he had a bit of a knee knock. He's fine, but he had a bit of a knee knock, so they sat him out. And I actually thought it left the group in there a little exposed for their work rate. I think Caldwell is so important to this group, not only from what he brings individually, but he honestly makes the others look better in terms of kind of the brunt that he takes. He is, he has that infectious, just insatiable desire to win the hard ball. And even psychologically, what that brings, that makes you walk a little taller, but it also kind of clears the path for the likes of Darcy Parish to do what he does best. So I thought it was interesting that happened last week. But I think Darcy Parish definitely, and Calders, Durham and Merritt kind of more on the outside, and then Yeah, I mean, if we'll obviously talk a bit about Nick Martin, but there's a hole there as well. I still feel like our engine room is pretty good, but we probably lack outside polish and class without Nick Martin particularly. But I think that will be the main starting midfield.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look on the outside, you've actually got some really great work rate guys. Nothing that feels penetrating and scary with the ball in hand by foot in terms of a Dersma and even a Fiorini. These are, Dersma's an elite runner and brings so much to be able to create those secondary options, drop back to be able to create another body in defence. And Fiorini brings great cultural pieces, but feels a little bit like he is probably a bit more of an in and under midfielder that's kind of found his way at Gold Coast through the outside components where there wasn't much space and has now landed at a secondary club where it's like, oh, I'd love to get on the inside here. Probably don't need me there too. Back out I go.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested about this Nick Martin replacement. But no club could replace a player of him internally with a like for like. We knew he was going to miss a good chunk of the year anyway with that late injury, but now categorically done for the 2026 season. He's not the most, this sounds harsh, a phrase. He's not the most irreplaceable player in a pure AFL sense. But for Essendon, with what they have, he was such a vital player. And he is elite. He's got all Australian caliber. So I don't hear that as people might be watching this or listening to this going, that's offensive. He's better than you. Yeah, everybody that's ever made an AFL list is better than me. That's not the question. But it's this, okay, for Essendon, he's almost the hardest player to be able to replace in terms of stocks on the list. How do you think and what are you seeing them trying to do to mitigate that loss of his both speed and skill set throughout and around the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say we already lacked a bit of that outside polish when he was already in the team. He and Zach Merritt are kind of the two that really shine in that way, kind of in and around the ball, and are the most creative, can create the most, I guess, pathways to goal, and then can be influential either back or forward wherever you need them. So he's kind of elite in all those facets. And for Essendon, we lack in players like that. So, and that's why we went as hard as we did keeping Zach Merritt too. Because imagine an Essendon without Zach Merritt and Nick Martin for 2026. We ain't winning that many games, I don't think. But look, I don't think we'll be able to replace Martin. Well, we definitely won't be able to replace him one for one. We'll replace him structurally. We'll spread that load to cover him. So really lean into rotating and role sharing. And to be honest, the last 2 weeks of match sim at training, they have shuffled the players is like a rotisserie chicken. The players that they have been running through that wing and through the midfield, they've been changing them on opposing teams, so seeing what combinations work best, throwing younger players on the wing, Fiorini closer to the inside, just mixing it up. And I think it's for that reason. But what Parish being in great form does do, and kind of will help with the Nick Martin piece, is it allows Durham to play a bit more on the outside. As fans and football fans in general, we love that burrowing, competitive nature with which he plays his football. It's a thing of beauty watching him put his body on the line, in a contest and that stoppage. He's tough and he puts, he's brave and that's great, and he does the in and under work, but he's also very good and has the skills to actually create play and to play on the outside. And he's got when it's 71% disposal efficiency this year. So he does have that creativity in him. So Darcy Parish and Calder's doing a lot of that engine room work in the middle will allow him to do a bit more work on the outside. And the other guy who will definitely rotate through there, put this down in the books, MJ, is Archie Roberts. They have been throwing him in the midfield a lot in the last couple of weeks. And my gosh, he's exceptional. He, again, like Durham, has that ability to win his own ball. He's tough and he's competitive and uncompromising, but he's also silky on the outside. He always wants to keep the ball moving, fluid, in motion, can see and find that inboard kick. He probably lacks a tiny bit of that polish right now. That a Nick Martin would bring, but he certainly has that capability to fill that role.
Yeah, and Essendon's such a fascinating team in the fantasy scope, and I think Archie's a ripping pick for people to consider, maybe more on the draft side of things, or if, the salary cap classic side, you're looking to split it out, no early buy, and 10 teams have that over that first month or so of the season. So if you're looking for someone that's going to be potentially in and around the ball, and that's where, this community series and practice games continue to give us more truth points to be able to validate it. But Archie Roberts is somebody that is getting slept on inside the fantasy community because, as you've mentioned, Fiona, even when he was playing off halfback, he looked probably one of the most composed and reliable movers of the ball anyway. If he's coming up the field in part to protect the absence of a Nick Martin, this is a play because while Essendon have some deficiencies in the game, we talked about the stoppage elements, their transition place is not much better statistically last year, but what they were was the best team in the AFL for handball receives. And as you've talked about, what's happening at training is don't just kick it around for no purpose. Don't just sit there and farm it and play keepings off. Is actually advance the ball forward. If they maintain those elements, this is where a player like Archie becomes so critical value for us in the fantasy elements. And then Caldwell and Parish, you've already talked about them. Wow, if they are where you've stated they are at, and they've shown already in their limited games over the last few years, these guys are absolute out and out, premium territory, best scoring midfielder outputs we can get, and both present financial value through there. That's super encouraging for me. I want to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up the podcast. I know so many of our viewers are already just finding so much great information out of what you're sharing from being at training, speaking to players, speaking to coaches, and getting these opportunities to be in and around clubland and viewing it with a healthy skeptical lens too, not just the biasy eyes that sometimes fans can have. That's one of the things I've always loved about you is you will call spades several spades if they deserve to be spaded. Talk to me about, there feels like the optimism that's come from Essendon in the off season. In part, is it feels like you've recruited beautifully at the draft last year in Sharp, Roby, and Farrow. What have you noticed? Again, I know you've been watching this club really closely for a number of years. What is so unique about this combination of three? And I guess then the secondary question off the back of that is, how early do you think they're going to get some games?
Yeah, I mean, there's from a kind of what you're to the eye, the most obvious thing to Essendon supporters and to the league would be in terms of comparison to what we've drafted in the past is their size. They are big. Like I'm at training and they're a couple of meters away from me, and I cannot believe the size that they are now, or they were a month ago when they walked in. They've already putting on a bit of size, but they're just bigger bodies, and we have not historically drafted like that in the past. They are ready to go physically as they are, and to be honest, I don't feel like they've looked out of place in terms of their aerobic capacity, and they don't look like they've at the end of a couple of big blocks of training, Maddie Innes, our fitness, strength and conditioning coach, will put them through like blocks of running around the oval and just high volume running loads. And they're not the ones trailing. Like, they are keeping up with the AFL list of players. So their baseline is really impressive already. That's from a physical point of view. What I've noticed from a kind of a deeper point of view is their that competitive natures. They are so competitive. They have this spirit already that they've already, like, they've worn the sash for years of their life. It's like a part of them already. And I know it sounds silly, but that should be at the top of the priority list for me when we're drafting these kids. Like, how badly in Roby and Sharp's way, they were Essendon supporters, so they already felt a bit of the affection for the sash already. But even with Farrow's case, talking to him and kind of viewing him from the outside, this insatiable desire to win for this club. And he doesn't stand out as much at training because he's so polished. He's so clean in everything he does. He glides across the ground, that silky left boot. So he doesn't stand out. He's quite unassuming. Doesn't kind of necessarily take away from how ready he could be to play an AFL game. And in the likes of Sharp, your eyes go to him. He just puts his body on the line. He wants to win that ball. He's not afraid of going up against harder bodies. He'll put himself in the way. he can get sucked up like a kid. He gets sucked up to the contest a little bit sometimes, and his opponent's out the back quite quickly sometimes. But they're working on his defensive side of the game. And I spoke to him at media day, and he was like, there's nothing this kid won't do to get the best out of himself. And I know for a fact, having been lucky enough to have some time with Brad Scott, that internally they just love him. It will be no shock if he lines up in round one. And in terms of Sullivan Roby, he has had that back issue, hotspot in the back. So he hasn't done any training yet. He's just been running, a bit of kicking with the ball, but that's about it. So in terms of Farrow, if we're moving Archie Roberts from the back line more up around the ball or on a wing even, that opens a spot out, because that essentially is taking his assets from the back line, and that was a lot of that run and carry. And actually, prior to them putting him in the middle at training, he and Mason Redman had started to develop quite a lovely 1-2. And even Andy McGrath, when he hasn't been locking down on one of our small forwards, there was some cohesion and chemistry happening. So if we're taking him out of that rotation and perhaps starting him on a wing or up in the midfield, that opens a spot clearly for what Jacob Farrow can bring, and that's a beautiful transition out of the back line. So it wouldn't surprise me if he played early too, MJ.
Yeah, look, he has all the markings and makings to me comparatively of Jordan Dawson, Hayden Young, in terms of just that physicality about them, the athletic traits to be able to take that intercept mark, the beautiful reader of the play. And the only thing better than his reading of the play is to hit a target 50, 55 metres out with that kick. Like, understandably so. Even just two of the three, we know Roby's going to be seen probably more likely in the back 2/3 of the year, and more so even maybe in the back half is more optimistic and realistic with Essendon knowing exactly where they are. They want Roby as well as these other kids to succeed long term. And I feel like Essendon have learnt, even just hearing, from a senior leadership perspective, they're like, we're not going to cook our kids.
There is no
like
need
we've done
to rush
previously.
him. Yeah, and there's absolutely no need to rush him. He's actually still growing, he was saying. So would you believe he's already had that huge growth spurt? So he is still growing. He looks like a gladiator in Troy or in like he's physically ready. Obviously he'll be making up some ground in endurance but he is that burst player, so it's not like he needs to have that elite kind of endurance. But they will not rush him at all.
Yeah, and look, Farrow to me, if Roberts is high, Farrow in fantasy footy, like he's a defender mid in eligibility. You can flip in every one of those positions, watch the role, watch the preseason. But to me, he's absolutely one of those cheap value rookie options that could get plenty of games, again, on the premise of Roberts playing high. And Sharp, it probably is that fifth midfield option. You talked about that four that sit through there. Is an advancement already on Setterfield. Will's a great player, but he is kind of your parachute of, all right, when we lose some big bodies and some health, insert Will to be able to get it done. Dyson's just this great complementary piece, and the defensive positioning that Caldwell really has based his game off over the last few years will really support Sharp. So I actually quite like the archetype of this midfield now for Essendon, let alone in 3 years' time if Kako starts to do what, Rankin, Bolton, Papley have done over the times of their career, what Farrow could do if he develops like a Dawson or a Young. So the optimistically reasons are very, very valid at Essendon. There's one more piece I want to ask you about. Go.
We probably still lack for a bit of pace and speed throughout that middle. But as you said, if you start rotating the likes of Isaac Kako through there, our players don't know what to do when the coaches have sent him to the centre bounce. No one can even get near him in our training. So his opposition have no idea how to handle him when he's at centre bounce. So as you said, if you throw him in, Archie Roberts, you start to get a bit more speed through those avenues, and then hopefully, as you said, Farrow and the next draft picks that come through, you start to build a bit more speed, because it can sometimes be seen as a bit flat-footed, that midfield. But yeah, we're building.
Oh, absolutely. And again, Roby's got to add with that pace and dynamic flow. So all the ingredients feel there. There's just about patience, opportunity, time, chemistry, which is the worst thing for football fans when you haven't had a level of, Richmond-like success. That's very easy to be like, oh, it's fine. 3 years of nothing. I've got 3 premierships, that
Yeah.
it's there. When you haven't had that, patience is hard.
Essendon fans don't do well with that word, MJ, patience.
Yeah, sorry.
And it's been 456 million days since your last finals win.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Patience is not quite the word that we like, but them the facts. They're the facts.
Them's the facts.
We know where we stand. We know we are statistically going to be the second youngest, second least experienced team in 2026. That doesn't mean that we cannot and should not be competitive in almost every game we play this year. Are we going to win most games? Probably not, but we absolutely should be competitive, especially if everyone stays fit. I mean, I looked around and I thought, I know we are the second youngest game, but I looked around at Match Sim last week and I saw Mason Redman and Kyle Langford and Zach Merritt and Darcy Parish, and I thought, these are guys that have been around forever, but they have not played consistent football. So we become the least experienced because they just not have played football altogether. So it's going to take time.
And they've had a radical transformation in the off-season with their conditioning too. And even just in one preseason, it's a small sample size. You can see the noticeable difference, both in the recruiting philosophy, but also in the way we're going to set these players up for success, how we're going to get consistency of troops available, as you mentioned right at the top. A big piece of the reason for a challenging year last year, not the only, but a really big piece, was a lack of availability and continuity. And we know great teams that make finals regularly, win premierships, fantasy scopes are great players for us to select. That continuity, your best ability is your availability. And unfortunately for Essendon, that has not been a phrase that they've been able to hold on to much for the last couple of years. I want to ask you one last thing before we wrap up the podcast. Is another big change that's happened for the club in the off season is your ruck line. It is totally different. And yes, Draper's going to be missed for a bunch of different reasons. And on paper, you've got some assets that could play through there. Probably the most likely as an outsider looking at the club that would have stepped right in to that leading ruck role. And in fantasy, we were hoping to be able to get was a Nick Bryan to be able to lead that ruck. Showed lots of promise in limited time. Where's his recovery at from that injury? Because is he in full training yet? Do you think he's going to be right for round one, or is he going to be a little bit earlier into the season before we see him?
Yeah, look, and this is purely from a gut perspective and having been at 20 plus training sessions so far in the off season, he looks like, if I was putting money on it, I would say he is a little bit behind schedule. That's what I would say, whether there's been a setback or two along the way, which is understandable, I guess, coming back sometimes from an ACL. He went down in round 5 from memory, so I don't think he's quite in terms of the earliest it would have been round 5, round 6. I don't think that's actually going to be what happens, but that's just out of guess and a gut feel. He has been doing a lot of running loads, been a little bit of football work, a little bit of lateral movement, always wearing the fluoro no contact cap, so hasn't integrated into kind of body contact work, has been doing a tiny bit of ruck bag work in the center of the ground, jumping, but very not high jumps whatsoever. So I would stay in terms of choosing or forecasting for him. Yeah, mid-year would be my earliest prediction.
So does that create an opportunity, again, with the fantasy side of things, we're always looking for who could be financially cheap for us and get us a bargain. And in draft too, it's like, who's the guy that nobody else is thinking about that I might be able to jag and get ahead of everyone else? Does a Lachie Blakiston come straight in and play this ruck role in the immediate of, the first 6 to 10 weeks of the 2026 season? Is he the guy that you could think and see is holding down that role? And if it is him, how's he looking at training?
Yeah, Lachie Blakiston, he's one of my favourite guys to talk about and has funnily made himself into every single one of my training reports so far this year, because he's kind of a marvel. He's a bit of a weird one in terms of he's 203 centimetres, but you'd never guess he was that big. He is an extra midfielder. He is our version of Mark Bliggsavs. His follow-up, his instinctive follow-up after he's done his tap work, he blocks, he'll tackle, he'll shepherd. He does all those defensive things instinctively, doesn't have to think twice. He gets on the end of handball chains. He'll anticipate where the ball's going, which team's going to win the clearance, and next thing you know, he's the option down in the forward line. So he's been sensational. I've thoroughly enjoyed watching him at training. There are some cynical people who will tell me he's been matched up against young Vigo Vicentini, who's 21 and a baby giraffe still in his infancy, and that's why kind of Lachie's shining a bit more. But I kind of am glazing more on him about his follow-up, and there's something about him. And I spoke to Peter Wright recently at Media Day, and he was marveling over his unpredictability in terms of what he's going to do next and how unpredictable that can be to opposition, because you never quite know which way he's going or where he's going to go or what he's going to do next. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to have that dual defender status as well in fantasy league, isn't he? So, I think it would be a great option. And it's funny because we haven't really seen him resting forward much yet. So, you know how a ruck will have a chop out, so Peter Wright will do the ruck work when he's having a resting, but it's always been on the bench. It's never been resting up forward. So we know he played the half a season last year in the back line. So this playing ruck back in his natural habitat should be a breeze for him.
Oh, I think he's one that, again, the community, once they start to actually see how Essendon roll out in community series games and they're not just getting, bits and pieces of information out of training reports, the fantasy community will rightfully move to him. You mentioned defensive eligible. He's under 300,000 in Supercoach. He's like 50K more than a Kadeen Coleman, who we're all just falling over to be able to get these value elements. He's under 400,000 in AFL fantasy. Again, about 100 odd K cheaper, 150K cheaper than Coleman in that format of the game. And he's just not getting drafted either in draft leagues. And with all these formats also having positional allocations that get added during the year, if he plays those handful of games in the ruck, man, a defender ruck, like it opens up everything. I'm with you. I think this is a sneaky little pick that the fantasy community should be getting on, and looks like he's going to get plenty of opportunity, as much if for no other reason, just injuries create opportunities.
That's right. And look, I think he is quite an introvert. So I do think, and he's not the biggest, most brunt kind of guy. So he is going to get monstered by the likes of your Kieran Briggs and perhaps Max Gawn. But what he's going to do is going to his mobility. He's going to be well and truly above for mobility and athleticism. So he's going to run those kind of guys off their feet. And his work rate is second to none. So you never have to question his work rate and his defensive accountability either. His field kicking can be a little bit off, but not to the point where I'm worried about it. It probably doesn't take a hell of a lot of marks, but what we've been training, what we've been kind of trialing at training has not allowed for many marks across the ground. It's more about kicking to a contest and winning the ball at ground level, if we can, to an even contest. So I think he'd be a great pick, personally.
Yeah, and we're seeing some ruck rule changes where they're trying to get more transition, less stoppages into it. And the fixture for Essendon, if you're thinking about a ruck analysis, it's not great because some of those monsters that you've mentioned, like he's got a couple of them early. He's got Tristan Cherry in round 3. He's got Max Gawn in round 5. He's got Jared Witts in round 6. So there's a couple of those monsters there. But as you've rightfully pointed out, where AFL have waited for the ball to get thrown up around the ground at stoppage previously for rucks, he's got to have a high athletic tank comparatively to some of those. So he might be up against secondary rucks, taller midfielders, and this is where he might be able to get an advantage both for fantasy coaches and certainly be able to create a great advantage for Essendon and their midfield around the ground. I think it's a really great shout from you, Fiona. Hey, it has been so good having this conversation with you, giving people that don't get the opportunity, that either they don't support Essendon, haven't got a chance to get down and watch or read too much. You've given our community of listeners an absolute gold mine of information to be able to get in touch and find out more to help us build our fantasy sides. Hey, where can we find you across social media? Where can we follow your content? You've really burst onto the scene in the content creation spaces over the last last 12 months. Essendon fans are rightfully so fallen in love with you. Where can we get in touch with you and where can we follow you across social media?
I mean, I feel like I'm plastering myself all over the place, but Bomber Banter, anywhere and everywhere, basically. Your usuals, YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook. Always more than happy to have robust discussions with AFL. I not only love Essendon, but I love the game, and I've met so many people, including yourself, MJ, content creators and fans from different clubs who I have been able to connect with and loved with, and that's what, at the root of it, that's what I love to do. And yeah, it's been a very wholesome journey so far. So a little bit of football happiness would not go astray, and a little bit of not putting it out there, universe, if you're listening, 13 games in a row. I'm just saying a hell no to that again if I can put in my order. But other than that, I'll be there for the fan cams after every game. So hopefully a few more wins this year would be nice. But thank you for having me, MJ. I'm not a guru in terms of the super coach fantasy space, but I love learning. So, and the way you get across your content, it doesn't make me feel dumb. So it just makes me feel like I'm learning. So that's a credit to you and how you present.
No, well, again, we've brought you in. You know Essendon as maybe as best as anyone in the community of space. And so that's what you've done. You've given people that are coming with a fantasy lens some visibility on that. So thank you so much. Hey, we put all the links in the description of the episode too for Bomber Banter. So if you're like, oh, I loved her take. I want to hear more. I want to understand more about Essendon. I want to follow her journey over the last couple of years. It's been incredible. All those links are in the description of the episode. Make sure you go and check it out. She's been doing an absolute phenomenal job. The media landscape is better when we have incredible content creators, which Fiona is one of them. So please go along, follow, subscribe, support, financially get involved and along. She can only continue to grow the channel with your support. And certainly if you're a Coaches Panel follower, could I encourage you, jump on over, click the link, subscribe. It's a small task. It takes 5 seconds, but actually makes a huge impact. And so we're another day closer to the start of the season. So much to learn, so much to unpack. And every single day of the preseason, the Coaches Panel will be posting, hoping to help you with your AFL fantasy and Supercoach side.